When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, the world said goodbye not only to the longest reigning monarch in the United Kingdom, but also to a figure whose presence spanned wars, political crises, scandals, and profound social transformations. Her image was always that of a reserved, firm, and almost impenetrable sovereign. Yet few knew that behind that restrained expression, she had left one final gesture that now raises more questions than answers. Her will was sealed for 90 years. 90 years. No subject alive today will be able to read those pages. Not even future historians will know what she intended to preserve, at least not anytime soon. Why hide for almost a century what one of the most powerful women in the world wrote? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver the videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Right after Queen Elizabeth II's death, while the entire world paused to witness the final farewell of the longest reigning monarch in British history, a crucial piece of information was practically drowned out by the pomp of the funeral. The Queen's will was sealed, and will remain so for the next 90 years. That's right, 90 years. But why? What is so sensitive in this document that the public cannot see it today, or even in the next 3 generations? This is no ordinary secret. The will is held under direct orders of the British High Court, and the justification is to protect the dignity of the monarchy. But when it comes to a public figure funded by public resources, that explanation sounds far too vague. Dignity from what? From scandals? From truths that could tarnish the image of the royal family? Queen Elizabeth was anything but passive. She spent 7 decades on the throne, navigating wars, social transformations, and internal crises that often required tough decisions behind the scenes. Many people believe a will only serves to divide assets. But in this case, it's something quite different. We're talking about someone who personified the British state during the most turbulent century of modern monarchy. And what if this document is, in fact, the Queen's final attempt to control her own narrative? To ensure that certain truths only come to light when time is on her side? This secrecy for 9 decades is no accident. It's the time needed for nearly everyone directly involved to be dead. It's as if Elizabeth herself were saying, "This story cannot be told yet." Could it be that inside there are names, orders, confessions, or warnings that would shake the crown if revealed now? Think about it. What if the will contains private instructions for Charles? Or for William? She might have left advice on how to deal with the internal fractures of the family, or even warnings about those close to them. With so many scandals in recent years, especially involving Prince Andrew and the explosive exit of Harry and Meghan, perhaps the Queen left her own version of events, away from the press, away from the public, but saved for the right moment. Another point few explore is the issue of money. The Queen had a massive personal fortune, separate from the public finances of the monarchy. Castles, art collections, investments. But there have long been persistent rumors that part of this fortune was hidden over the years. What if the will reveals the location of these assets? Or the truth about how they were accumulated? We're talking about figures that could exceed billions. And there's still a symbolic component that cannot be ignored. Since Queen Victoria's reign, the royal family has often used wills not only to divide assets, but also to leave historical records, private opinions, messages to future generations, and even reflections on their reign. Queen Elizabeth II lived through the end of empires, the collapse of the Soviet Union, 9/11, and the rise of the internet. She saw the world change. Would it be surprising if she wanted to leave, in secret, her version of events? Of course, there is a huge risk in all this. A poorly interpreted phrase, a misunderstood order, could fuel crises. Perhaps that's why the secrecy is more than protection, it's containment. A shield carefully planned so that her final word is only heard at a time when those involved can no longer respond, and the wounds have already healed or been forgotten. Important detail, not even members of the royal family had full access to the document. This turns the will into a sealed capsule, something that will travel through decades until it is finally opened. And when it is, the world will already be a different place. But the impact may be just as powerful as if it had been read today. All this leads us to a question that has echoed in silence since the day the pen touched the paper. What did Elizabeth II want to protect so zealously? because no one seals words for 90 years without a good reason. It is impossible to speak of the monarchy's secrets without the name Diana Spencer appearing like a specter in the hallway of British history. Even decades after her tragic death in Paris in 1997, the Princess of Wales remains an unsettling presence for the image of the crown. Her legacy is so powerful that it still inspires books, investigations, and documentaries. But the biggest piece of this puzzle may lie where no one can reach, in the sealed will of Elizabeth II. During her reign, the Queen maintained a stubborn silence regarding the developments in Diana's life and death. There was never an interview, a confession, not even a direct acknowledgement of the public grief that spread throughout the United Kingdom after the accident. But those who closely followed that period noticed a sharp change in the monarch's behavior. For the first time, she retreated. She remained silent for days. She was criticized, and when she finally appeared, she seemed more pressured than prepared. Now think with me. What if, inside that sealed will, Elizabeth II recorded her view of the events surrounding Diana? Not a confession, of course, but a personal, private reading that could never be spoken in public. It's plausible to imagine that she wrote down her perspective on Charles's marriage, on the behind the scenes of the separation, and even on the conflicts that arose between the palace and Diana's charismatic figure. Bolder theorists believe there is more. Some suggest that the Queen may have documented information that contradicts the official version of the accident. It's a thin and dangerous line because it enters the territory of speculation. But the fact remains that, for over 2 decades, doubts have been fueled by conflicting testimonies, missing documents, and reopened investigations. And what if the Queen knew something that could not be revealed during her lifetime? Some say Diana had saved letters, conversation records, and even threats received before the accident. And what if some of those pieces reached Elizabeth? What if she archived them, or even included them in her will as a warning to future generations of the monarchy? Wouldn't that be one of the reasons to keep everything away from public eyes for so long? Another point rarely discussed is how Diana affected the internal structure of the royal family. Her popularity was a real problem for the institution. The Queen knew that. And what if she had left instructions in the will to prevent something similar from ever happening again? A kind of handwritten or typed lesson to protect the crown from future Dianas? There's also the hypothesis that Elizabeth made direct mentions of William and Harry. Diana was their mother, and her death left deep marks on both. Could the will contain advice, requests, or even criticisms about how they should deal with their mother's past and their own roles in the monarchy? Could this be the reason for the secrecy? To protect the image of sons who are still alive? And what if that part of the document also contains names of people within the palace who influenced the decisions that distanced Diana from the family? People who perhaps are still alive? This kind of information, even if merely a personal narrative, could trigger an institutional earthquake. A single mention could be interpreted as an accusation. The most curious thing is that Diana's figure continues to grow. She not only did not fade with time, but became an eternal symbol of resistance, humanity, and fragility within an institution known for its rigidity. And the Queen's silence about it always seemed strategic. Perhaps, inside that envelope sealed for nearly a century, lies not just the opinion of a grandmother, but of a head of state who had to deal with a crisis that threatened the very core of the monarchy. A crisis that, to this day, echoes in every Harry interview, in every headline about Meghan, in every awkward silence from Charles. And what if the Queen's most well-kept secret is precisely what she never said in life, about Diana? If there's one part of the British monarchy's history that few like to touch, it's what happened behind the scenes before and during World War II. But the more we look into that past, the more it seems like there are unresolved issues. And when you connect all of that to Elizabeth II's sealed will, it's hard not to wonder, did she leave some revelation about this dark period that still needs to be hidden for nearly a century? Let's start with a name that always comes up in these discussions: Edward VIII, Elizabeth II's uncle. He abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, but what many forget is that he had a troubling relationship with the Nazi regime. In 1937, he and Wallis visited Germany, were received with celebration, and even met with Hitler. This wasn't just a diplomatic gesture. There are documents indicating that the Third Reich considered Edward a useful figure if the United Kingdom were to be defeated. Seriously, Hitler considered putting him back on the throne. And guess who was nearby when all of this was happening? Young Elizabeth. Still a child, but watching it all. She grew up seeing this scandal unfold within her own household, while the entire country tried to erase what had happened. Could that have stayed with her over the years? And what if that piece of history, so carefully swept under the rug, reappears in the words she wrote in her will? Now hold on to this. A video that circulated years ago shows Elizabeth, still a young girl, doing the Nazi salute alongside her sister, her mother, and yes, Edward himself. The palace claimed it was just a child's joke. But jokes usually have context. And why was a video like that kept hidden until the 2010s, when it surfaced unofficially? The silence was almost immediate, and the discomfort too. The point here isn't to accuse, but to understand. If there is a deeper truth about ties between the crown and Nazism, Elizabeth would have been the only person with enough power, information, and motivation to record it, away from public view. Not in a speech, not in a biography, but in her will. And that's where the most unsettling suspicion lies. What if part of this 90-year secrecy is to protect not just names, but compromising memories? World War II is, to this day, a pillar of national pride in the United Kingdom. The image of the Queen working as a mechanic during the war is constantly remembered as a symbol of courage. But that public, heroic side may also have served to hide what was happening behind the scenes. Because if there were doubts about where some of the British nobility stood before the war, those doubts were never fully addressed. There's more. Historical archives that could clarify these ties are still being denied to researchers. The palace, along with the government, restricts access to a range of documents that could shed light on those relationships. That alone raises the question, why hide it now, so long after? What still cannot be shown? And what if Elizabeth II knew all of this? If she had evidence, or at least convictions, that were never revealed? And what if she decided to write about this past in the only place where she could be honest, without judgment, without headlines, in her will? Maybe she left instructions, records, or even a request that certain truths never come to light. Let's not forget that, throughout her life, the Queen always avoided public controversies. But that doesn't mean she didn't know about the cracks in the foundation of her own family. Her silence was always strategic, and a document sealed for nearly a century sounds less like protection and more like containment. What did Elizabeth II know about the relationship between the royal family and the Nazi regime? And more importantly, why can't it be told yet? When we talk about royal inheritance, the image that usually comes to mind is jewels, castles, and properties of incalculable historical value. But what if I told you that what lies hidden behind Queen Elizabeth II's sealed could go far beyond that? We're talking about hidden fortunes, assets off the public radar, and perhaps even legacies the monarchy never wanted to see the light of day. Elizabeth II was considered one of the wealthiest women in the world. But contrary to what many think, not all of that wealth was part of the institutional monarchy. There was a very clear separation between what belonged to the crown, such as Buckingham Palace and the crown jewels, and what was the Queen's personal property. Estates like Sandringham and Balmoral, for example, belonged exclusively to her. And it's these private possessions that raise the most questions. Over 7 decades on the throne, Elizabeth accumulated wealth that is not clearly listed anywhere. Her personal fortune is estimated to be around $500 to $600 million, but no one knows for sure. Part of it may be invested in artworks, jewels inherited from past generations, or even offshore accounts. Now ask yourself, if all this is true, why keep it hidden for 90 years? One of the strongest theories among financial researchers is that part of the Queen's wealth is tied to funds and investments hidden in tax havens. And this isn't just speculation. In 2017, the so-called Paradise Papers revealed that the Queen had indirect investments in islands like the Cayman and Bermuda through the Duchy of Lancaster. Although everything was legal, the backlash was immediate. The monarchy, which had always tried to distance itself from the image of abusive privilege, was blemished. And what if the will contains more information like that? And there's more. Throughout the 20th century, the royal family received inheritances and private donations from members of the British aristocracy, many of which were kept off public records. Some of these fortunes came from families involved in colonial-era businesses, with origins that today would be considered, at the very least, controversial. What if the Queen left instructions on how to handle these assets? Or worse, what if she revealed that part of this wealth was intentionally hidden to avoid scandals? Another issue involves private jewels. Some of the most valuable pieces in the world are in the hands of the royal family, but it's not exactly clear which belong to the state and which are personal heirlooms. If the will makes that distinction, and it turns out to be controversial, we could be facing a diplomatic and institutional bombshell, especially because some of these pieces have disputed origins, including precious stones taken from former British colonies. Throughout her life, the Queen always maintained a profile of financial discretion. She didn't flaunt wealth, repeated outfits, and avoided grand extravagances. But that doesn't mean her fortune was modest. Quite the opposite. All signs point to her being extremely strategic in maintaining a public image of restraint while managing her assets far from public view. Now imagine if the will revealed that this fortune was, in part, transferred to still unknown destinations. Accounts in third-party names, private donations, safes outside of England. What if some of those resources had already been moved before her death? That would justify the secrecy, protecting the family's financial integrity and preventing investigations that could tarnish her legacy. It's worth remembering that the royal family's financial documents are protected by a series of legal exemptions. Unlike any ordinary British citizen, the Queen didn't have to declare certain assets or justify financial movements. This opens the door for all kinds of maneuvering. And what if she knew that, at some point, someone would dig too deep? The will could be her way of ensuring that those truths would only be discovered in a safer future. What's at stake here isn't just money. It's reputation, memory, and power. If the wealth Elizabeth accumulated during her reign were revealed in detail, the debate about the monarchy's role could change forever. And maybe precisely for that reason, the Queen left everything locked behind 7 seals. After all, how much is a secret worth when it's kept for 90 years? Have you ever stopped to think that maybe Queen Elizabeth II's will wasn't written just to divide assets or resolve personal matters? What if that document is actually a warning, a carefully calculated message for those who come after her, especially for whoever inherits the throne? It sounds like something out of a movie, but in reality, it makes perfect sense. The Queen saw more than 7 decades of monarchy from the inside. She knew everything. She witnessed alliances form and collapse, secrets emerge and be buried, scandals leak and others simply vanish. If anyone had enough knowledge to leave a warning about the future of the crown, it would be her. And the most curious detail? She decided that this message can only be read 90 years from now. That sounds more like a ticking time bomb than a simple will. Now imagine the weight of such a message. A letter from the most experienced monarch in British history, addressed not to her family, but to the very institution she protected her entire life. What could she have said? Warnings about internal disputes? Advice about public figures who are still around, influential but dangerous? Or perhaps something deeper about the limits of the monarchy itself? Some believe the Queen may have left instructions on how to act in the event of institutional collapse. That's right, a sort of unofficial protocol. Something like, if this happens, do that. You might think it's an exaggeration, but anyone who follows politics knows that the British monarchy has faced real crises in recent years. The departure of Harry and Meghan, the scandals involving Prince Andrew, the loss of popularity, all of it has eroded the royal family's public image. And Elizabeth, by all accounts, was never one to ignore the signs. And what if this warning is directed at William? He represents continuity, the modern hope of the royal family. The Queen may have left tough, even unpopular advice that she believed was necessary to keep the monarchy standing. Perhaps it's not just about avoiding mistakes, but about correcting what has already been done. There are also those who say this message could include something much more delicate, suspicions the Queen carried in silence, people close to her who may have betrayed her trust, figures within the monarchy who, behind the scenes, may have sabotaged decisions or manipulated information. What if she left those names recorded? Not as an accusation, but as a warning? That possibility cannot be ignored. After all, Elizabeth was known for her strategic coldness. She was never impulsive. Every move she made was calculated. And if she chose to write something that could only be read decades later, it means that what's in there couldn't be said during her lifetime, not even in confidence to Charles or any other family member. Another important point, the psychological impact of all this. Because it's not just about the truth. It's about the fear of what that truth might cause. A single name written in that document, a single ignored instruction, could become a ghost that haunts the throne for years. Maybe that's why the document is so carefully locked away. It's not to protect the Queen. It's to protect those who remain. And if you're thinking this all sounds too conspiratorial, think again. Throughout history, how many times has the British monarchy used silence as a tool of control? Elizabeth learned from every one of those moments. And what if the will is her final move, the most calculated of them all? What's most intriguing is that, even without access to the content, the very fact that a document is sealed for so long already changes everything. It forces the next generation to live under the shadow of something that has yet to be revealed. A warning that hasn't been read, but is there, waiting for the right moment. Among all the theories surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's will, this may be the boldest, and also the most unsettling. What if what's locked away in that vault for 90 years isn't just a confession about scandals or a warning for the future, but something even deeper? Something that calls into question the very idea of who Elizabeth was. What if she knew a blood secret? A truth about identity and birth that could never be spoken during her lifetime? This hypothesis might sound exaggerated at first, but throughout the history of the British monarchy, this kind of mystery is hardly rare. Baby swaps, hidden heirs, children born out of wedlock, parallel bloodlines, all of these have been suggested, investigated, or suppressed. And when the person in question is the most powerful woman of the century, with full access to the state apparatus and complete control over the official narrative, silence says a lot. One theory circulating among researchers and genealogists concerns the period surrounding Elizabeth's birth in 1926. Officially, she was born at 17 Bruton Street in London, in a house belonging to the Bowes-Lyon family. But contradictory accounts about the location, the presence of witnesses, and the registration itself have fueled suspicions over the years. There are even alternative versions claiming the true location was never accurately recorded. That alone might not be enough to raise serious doubts. But the problem is that there are signed documents related to her birth were removed from public archives during the early years of her reign. This has never been officially confirmed, but it's cited by researchers who have attempted to trace the royal lineage in detail. What if she discovered, years later, that something was wrong with the story told about herself? Another theory points to an even more complex possibility, that Elizabeth might not have been the biological daughter of those she was said to be. That during a moment of instability, a quiet plan was devised to safeguard the royal succession. A baby switch during a crisis? A rightful heir hidden for convenience? It sounds like fiction, but cases like these exist in historical records, and the monarchy has always had the means to cover them up. Now imagine what such a revelation would cause if confirmed. If the will contains this truth, it changes not only the story of the Queen, but the entire legitimacy of the royal bloodline. The entire succession could be questioned. William, Charles, all the names we see at the top of the monarchy today could be there by mistake or manipulation. And what if the secret isn't about Elizabeth herself, but someone close to her? A hidden sibling? A relative declared dead at birth? Secret documents involving adoptions, disappearances, or even illegitimate children of other monarchs who had to be erased from the map to maintain the crown's stability. All of this has happened in other European royal houses. It wouldn't be impossible to imagine something similar among the Windsors. The Queen's silence about her personal life was always absolute. But what if, at the end of her life, she felt the need to write everything down? Not for now, but for a future where the monarchy had already evolved. Maybe she wanted to tell the truth, but without triggering an immediate earthquake. So she decided, this secret should only be revealed when all those involved were already gone. The existence of a will sealed for so long, with access denied even to family members, reinforces this suspicion. Because when it's not just about money or political advice, what else would justify such caution? Only something that threatens the entire foundation of the castle. Not just the walls, but the very base. And what if the official story of the British monarchy is, in part, a construction? A well-staged play? Elizabeth II's will could be the first crack in that stage, revealing not just secrets, but truths that were never meant for the public. The death of Queen Elizabeth II marked the end of an era. But the silence that followed, represented by a will sealed for 90 years, might be louder than any speech she gave in life. What was left inside is not just an inventory, but a hidden narrative, a set of truths that, for some reason, could not be spoken now. Every theory, every suspicion, every question mark surrounding that document only reinforces one certainty. There is something in there that could change everything. This story is just one piece, and one day, you may see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.